Hey there everybody, Ben and Katie here from Reorigin. By now you know us pretty well, but we're going to spend some time getting to know Ben just a little bit more. So last week Ben put a post in our main forum in our community just asking some of our members what their biggest questions were for you. So we're going to go through some of those questions. Ben has no idea what I'm going to ask him, so we're going to have a little bit of fun with this.
I'm very excited about it. So let's get into it.
All right, so the first question, and probably the most popular question from our members, do you still practice the main Reorigin brain retraining technique, the Longform?
Yeah, so this is a really good question, and the answer is I do. I cycle in and out of it. As I've explained to some members on our Q&A calls, I've been practicing brain retraining a long time. For those that are new to the channel, I've recovered from my own healing journey, going through chronic Lyme disease, spending 3 years bedbound, and ultimately sort of brain retraining my way back into everyday work and life and all of the rest. And using a main technique like we teach in the program was something that was really pivotal and really necessary for a long time, and something that I relied very heavily on, which essentially, for those of you who are new to the channel or new to brain retraining, it's really a way to change the way that the brain processes information so that we can spend more time in the parasympathetic state, our body can become more resource efficient, and we can find ourselves more optimized for healing and recovery. So yeah, brain retraining really comes down to not healing the body using the mind like we would kind of think of. It's really just rekindling the body's own ability to self-regulate and to self-heal. And so the short answer to that is I do. As a human being, I still get dysregulated, stuff still happens, and while I consider myself 100% healthy, I do find that it's very helpful to have all of these tools to draw on. And I'll just say that I define 100% healthy as where health is no longer something, or I'll say my own health, is something that I no longer really even think about. It doesn't mean that I don't appreciate it. It doesn't mean I don't enjoy it, but it means that I'm not worried about it. It's not taking up any mental bandwidth or room like it once took up all of the room in my brain. So being in that place, I'll find that I'll go through long periods of weeks or months, or in some cases years, where I didn't really have to think too much about brain retraining. But invariably, one of the magic things about, or amazing things about the brain is that it can constantly adapt and grow. And as it changes, we find ourselves ready to change with it, to take on sort of the next level of challenges of, say, starting a company or entering relationships or traveling or doing more things, finding more ways to get out into the world, and ultimately, I think, to give back. And so as I embark on some of these next levels of challenges, at certain points, like as we speak today, we're in California, and I flew here last night. 3 days before that, I was in Barcelona. This is very challenging for the body, for any human system. And so I certainly went back to doing some brain retraining, particularly even the long form, to make sure that I was set and centered for all of the meetings and filming and things that we have while we're here. So yeah, it still continues to be a tool in the toolkit.
Absolutely, love it. All right, our next question, what would you say is absolutely 100% unequivocally the most important thing when it comes to neuroplasticity and brain retraining?
Oh my God.
Oh, you only get one.
The one thing, right? Because there can only be one. Yeah, so this is actually a question that comes up a lot every week on the info calls that we do. And these are things that anyone can join. If you go to reorigin.com, book a call, you'll see there's info calls that I personally do every week. And there's always one person that asks this question: what's the one thing that you could do, to retrain your brain?
The magic pill.
The magic pill, yeah.
There is no magic pill, guys.
Then, well, there is no magic pill. There is one thing. And the one thing is, there's a little bit of a roundabout answer, but it's really consistency over time, right? So yes, there's a lot of nuance into what are the things that we do to retrain the brain, what are the techniques, the strategies, the nervous system calming, the mood elevation, the changes to our our way of thinking and even being and breathing. There's so many subtle changes. And again, this is one of the things that I love about brain retraining is it seems like the deeper you go into it, the deeper you can go. And my experience has really been that the deeper you actually go, the more the lights seem to come on in life. Life just gets brighter and brighter because our experience of everything just becomes so much more vivid. So when it comes back to like the one thing that we can do, there's a lot of different practices to get started. You can certainly check out some of the videos on this YouTube channel. Of course, for those interested, you can check out our brain retraining program. But when it comes to implementing these things, if I had to say the most important thing really comes down to consistency over time. Because something that I learned really early on, back to my personal trainer days in my early 20s, and I was also working as a physical therapist assistant, where we would, have these really good protocols that we would give people. And I found that you could give someone even the best protocol, right? Something that's science-backed, that's according to the latest research, it's simple enough to do on a Post-it note. But if they're not able to do it consistently, it wouldn't really produce the desired effect. So our ability to be consistent with these techniques over time is really what makes the change. And on the flip side, I'd say that the great thing about that is that when we are consistent with this thing over time, then your brain really has no choice but to change. It's just like, imagine going to the gym and exercising every day. Of course you're going to feel different. Of course you're going to function differently. You're being consistent with it. So for that reason, we have the entire Reorigin community. We have group coaching, we have one-on-one coaching, all these things that we've developed to help solve that one problem of consistency.
Absolutely. I think one thing I'm just going to add, you didn't ask me, but I'm going to add it anyway, is that consistency doesn't mean perfection, right? Like it just means finding whatever that consistent practice looks like for you, but it doesn't have to be this like perfect every single day thing.
Right. Consistency stacks up.
Yes.
I really like the James Clear, approach here from Atomic Habits. He says that every time you show up, even if you don't show up every day, but every time you show up, you are casting a vote for the future self that you want to be. Absolutely. And it's so, similar to brain retraining, because every time you execute on that new pattern, you are literally sending new signals down a particular neural pathway, and you're essentially casting a vote for that being the main pathway.
Yeah, love it. Love it. Okay, next question. I love this one. I even commented on this person's question and said, love this question a week ago, so that's amazing. Next question, what are you most curious about right now in current brain research?
Yeah, so I think this is a great question. The thing that I'm most interested right now, and we just did a video on this, is the mind-body connection and how we can really leverage our bodies to make changes in our brains. There's more and more research coming out about this. There's something known as interoception, which is our brain's connection to our body's internal states, right? And we know that the communication pathways between the brain and the body are bidirectional. So our brain can send signals to the body, like to create movement. And similarly, our body can send messages back to the brain. And when we change things like our rate of breath, when we change our posture, when we change our movement patterns, our facial expressions, right? This absolutely sends new information back to the brain. And I think this is just endlessly fascinating, but also really actionable, because as I learn these things, I practice them myself. And it also becomes a sort of fun thing that you can really not just learn intellectually about neuroplasticity as a topic, but you can actually experience it happening in real time and day over day.
Absolutely. And I think one of the things that I love most about Reorigin, I love it, it's amazing. One of the things I love most is that as brain research is evolving, Reorigin is evolving, right? So we are evolving the program as we become more knowledgeable and more interested in things. It's not just this static program, but it's something that's going to continue to grow. Yeah, exactly. And we know, if you look back throughout history, there's always the science says this thing, and the next week it's something different. And well, I think the directions are getting clarified. There's still always going to be new research, new tools being uncovered. And we like to say that, Reorigin is as dynamic as the brain itself. Yes. So we aim to always continuously evolve the program, and in so doing, really improve it. Yes, absolutely. Okay, next question. How gradual was your return to exercise? Did your muscle strength return gradually over time while practicing brain retraining?
That is an interesting question. So I found that this was actually a really interesting realization that I had in the beginning of my illness when I got Lyme disease. I was in a surfing trip in West Africa. I probably had the Lyme in my system for a long time, but when it got to that point of being sort of like the straw that broke the camel's back, and I found myself in pretty severe dysregulation, I felt extremely weak. And I remember being, of course, kind of horrified in that moment, but also really curious. Why was I feeling so physically weak? Because this was literally a shift that happened seemingly from like one day to the next, or certainly one week to the next. And if you think about this, for anyone, like if you've ever had a really bad cold or flu or something, right? You just feel really weak. It isn't the case that overnight you suddenly lost, 50% of your muscle mass. Similarly, if you didn't sleep for 3 days and you went into the gym, you'd probably find that you could only lift, a third of what you could normally lift. And again, it's not because all of a sudden you've lost, 66% of your muscle mass. What we've lost is the ability to recruit muscle fibers with the brain to activate those motor neurons. And so the pathway back was really first and foremost just about creating regulation in my system, doing all the things we talk about in terms of brain retraining, slowing down, changing my relationship to my body, and kind of like we say in the program, allowing the gears to start to mesh again. What happens a lot, I think, when you've been sidelined with an illness or an injury is we try and come back too quickly, especially if we have this identity or we perceive ourselves as needing to be in a certain place. And my experience of that, which I certainly tried to do, was always met with one of two things. In the best case scenario, it would feel like stepping on the gas and the wheels would just slip under me. It would feel like I didn't really have traction. And in the more common and unfortunate scenario, I would be able to maybe move the needle for a little bit, and then I would find myself just, really back in the throes of symptoms and even heavier fatigue from the exertion. So it was really a gradual process. And from the time that I really started getting into brain retraining, I would say it was about 8 to 10 months before I was about able to start to get back into, at first, part-time work and start to re-engage. But even then, I remember setting some firm boundaries for myself. I started off with a 3-day work week instead of a 5-day work week. I made a point to end at 4 or 5 o'clock, and I would come straight home and rest and have my routines and everything, and still had to be, fairly diligent about that. And then I got several months, maybe 4, 5, 6 months of that under my belt, started to have a little bit more capacity, started to add in some deliberate exercise. And that, I think, was a real learning process for me of constantly overstretching, overstepping, letting my body would let me know that was the case. And this is what led to what we talked about in the program as dancing with discomfort, right? Constantly learning where those boundaries are, respecting them, sometimes overstepping them, and then stepping back and continuing. And I think, the whole thing, if I look back, was really a couple of years to get to a point where, as I mentioned in the beginning of this video, where I would say I'm fully healed. That's to say, I didn't have to consciously consider these things to the extent that I did in the beginning.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. I know that's going to be very helpful for a lot of people, just to hear that time frame, right? Because like you said, I think we tie our identities to something, and so we feel like, all right, I'm feeling a little bit better, I gotta go, I'm back in life, and then it always ends up pushing us back. So slow is smooth, and smooth is fast. That's what I always say. All right, okay, next question, another good one. What do you do when your limbic system is particularly active and may be less responsive than usual to regular interventions like the Longform?
Yeah, fantastic. So the first thing I always do as a go-to is relaxing the nervous system, calming the system down. And more and more we've found that this doesn't really happen by trying to relax, right? We have a saying that we allude to in the program, which is never in the history of being told to calm down has anyone actually ever calmed down. Yeah. Probably true. A much, I think, more efficient way to do that is to relax the body. And for me, I really love progressive muscle relaxation. It's basically the very simple practice or process of tensing up your muscles and letting go. And the reason I like this so much is because we can do it anywhere, anytime, and to any degree of intensity. We can do it in a more guided fashion. We have some Yoga Nidra videos on this channel that walk you through tensing and releasing, or bringing awareness to and then letting go of different parts of the body. We can do this while we're in a meeting. There's no one needs to know about it. And what it does is it creates this little shift in tension and relaxation, and allows us to settle in that new sort of relaxation response. But I think the question was really about what to do when the limbic system is overactive. So that's one of the things that I can do to sort of like create this little layer of cushioning around me. I will declutter also. I'll clear things off my calendar. I will clear some things off my desk, my physical space. Just giving myself that sense of space can help to reduce overwhelm and input that's coming in through the nervous system. And so I think for me, that first step is really all about just getting back to feeling centered, getting back to feeling a little bit lighter, freer. We have a video on how to unload your arms when you're feeling heavy, how to unload your system. Yeah. All of these types of things are things that I practice probably at this point without even knowing it, but it's just, they come up. And then once I have this sort of, little bit more buffer, then I have more directedness. I have much more control over the limbic system and where it goes.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's great. Awesome practices. Okay, next. This is two different people's question. Actually, I'm going to just combine them. Someone asked, what were the very last stages of your recovery like? Could you tell when you were in the home stretch? And then adding on to that, when did you really recognize that you were starting to get your life back?
Great questions. Yeah. So, of course, well, maybe not of course, but in my case, there was no finish line or point which I came to and then crossed, and it was like, I can't look back now and say, Tuesday, April 21st of 2012 was the day that I was fully recovered. Of course, it was a much, much more gradual process. Yeah. And it really came in retrospect. I would have these retrospective moments where I realized how far I had come. And I think this is something that's really important. Very often we focus on something called the gap instead of the gain, right? We focus on how far we think we still have to go or how far we might have to go. And we sort of, in doing so, we fail to compare ourselves to where we were yesterday or last week or last month or last year. And I think for me, that was a constant. I was always, thinking about what I wanted to do, and it creates, a lot of stress. And so I would find in these moments, like one, particular instance, one of my first jobs when I was getting back into full life was in Times Square. It was a very busy, crowded place. I had a lot of fatigue going on the commute to the subway. When I would go up the subway steps, I would often sit down on every third step and rest for a few minutes and then get back up, take another few steps, rest for a few minutes, and it was just, that was the way it went for a long time. Until I remember, a time when I was starting to get better. I was doing this, incremental training, going through the motions. My capacity was expanding, and one day I got there. Maybe it wasn't one day, but I bounded up the subway steps and I started going to work and walking down the rest of the street. And I paused for a moment. And I looked back at the subway and I looked back down those steps that I just came up. And in that moment, I had that retrospective view, that realization of how far I'd come. And I remembered how just a few months before I'd have to sit and stop, and now here I was, running up the stairs. And I think the whole healing and recovery process, if I think about it, was really punctuated by things like that. And I still experience things like that in other ways. Public speaking is one of those. I was terrified of public speaking. For those that don't know, I gave a TED Talk, one of the most terrifying things I did at the time. But it was a very similar thing where, now maybe I'll step foot on a stage and I'm comfortable with it because I've done a lot more of it, but I can take that pause and look back and be like, wow, and just appreciate, how nervous, how fearful I was, and how relaxed I can now be, or at least that ability to harness the power of anxiety in a positive way and sort of roll with it. So anyway, just to sum it up, the question was, what was the question again?
You had it. What were the last stages of your recovery like? Could you tell that you were in the home stretch? When did you recognize you were getting your life back?
So it was in moments like that.
Yes.
And I think this is something now that we hear a lot from our members, where they might go on vacation or something and come back and they'll explain, they'll start sharing what they did. They say, oh, I went, and then they'll realize as they're explaining, oh my God, like I just realized I did that thing. I went out for, a meal with friends, and that's something I wasn't able to do 6 months ago. So it's really a series of these, milestones.
The small wins, the science of small wins.
It stacks up.
Yes, it does. Okay, great. Another really good question I like. So did other people reflect back to you during your recovery that they noticed you were getting better? Did you get that reflection back?
That's something that I really wished I had more of in my life at the time, was more people to sort of mirror back to me. I would say that what I did have were people who believed in me. I had friends and family who didn't lose faith in me, and who really believed in my ability to recover. And that belief in me in times when I didn't even believe in myself was incredibly helpful, incredibly encouraging. And sure, I think at times there might have been some of that mirroring back, but had I been part of a group or a community or something that I had access to more feedback, I think that would have been incredibly valuable.
Okay, that's really interesting. And I'm gonna ask this question. You kind of already answered it, but if there's anything else that you can add to it. So what did you do to help you get through your flares, your dips, your doubts? You didn't have a community like Reorigin has, or coaches like Reorigin has to lean on. So what did you do for yourself that potentially this community does for all of our members?
So I looked to others and to information. That's where my brain went to. It went down the course of listening to, this has gone back 12 years now, podcasts were just getting started. UCSF and UC Berkeley were putting a lot of their 1 and 200 level courses online, things about neuroplasticity, about neurobiology, audiobooks. I'm saying a lot of audio stuff because at the time I had a lot of brain fog. I wasn't able to actually read. But I would listen to information that was inspiring, that was hopeful, that I found interesting also, and that gave me the sense that there's a possibility. Because at those times, especially, man, in no other times than when you're in a dip or you're in any acute, struggle with your illness, it really feels static. Our brain goes into that shutdown. We've talked about it before. This is the dorsal ventral or dorsal-vagal response, and it kind of creates this walling off type of effect where we feel like we're stuck now and we're always going to be stuck in the future, and we feel like we've always felt that way in the past too. And it just sort of collapses everything into like, this is the eternal experience. But if we can peer outside of that and we can look to information or reach out to, to a community or peers or something, it gives us perspective. It gives us this sense that actually our brain is constantly changing, our body is capable of repairing itself, and it gives us a sense that even though this feels dire and this feels eternal, it's actually a momentary discomfort in an otherwise long, healthy, and happy life. And so I think anything that can be done to remind yourself of that, and then I consciously evolved some practices that could help me do that when I needed them, when I was going through dips. And I'll just share what a few of those were. One of them is a visualization of zooming out. So I think of, and sometimes even would use Google Maps or Google Earth and just start where I am, like think of the room, and then go zoom out and then zoom it out in the map and zoom it out. And you get this something that astronauts describe as the overview effect, right? You just sort of see everything at a distance. and it really, really lightens the load. You can take everything with a bit of a grain of salt. Yeah. And then the second thing and the final thing that I'll share that's really helped is learning to lighten myself. Again, check out the video that we did on lightening the load when you're feeling heavy, but just anything I could do to move my body to loosen up. As a skateboarder, I kind of likened it to experiences or times when I was skateboarding and I would hit a gravel patch, which is, it creates a lot of tension. But in that moment, the worst thing you can do is actually tense up because it creates rigidity, and you need that flexibility to move through that bumpy terrain. And so I would there's this sort of maneuver or technique you can do on the skateboard, which is you kind of get really light, you take a deep breath and you get really light and you kind of like cruise over that rough patch, and then you settle back down. And so I tried to sort of mirror that in my own physiology, make myself feel lighter, can do that by putting on some music, a funny show, get out of my head, cruise through it, and then use those expanding awareness tools to know that I'm going to come out the other side.
I love it. That's awesome. This is another question that really coincides with that. I love all of these questions that they just seem, I feel like these guys like synced up and we're going to ask all these questions together. Okay, when you were on your healing journey, Reorigin didn't exist. Did you research everything yourself? Did you do a brain retraining program? And if you were experimenting on yourself, how did you figure out what worked? And also, lastly, how much of what you did actually ended up in Reorigin?
That is there's a few questions in there.
I love it.
That's
this is such a great question.
Yeah, so at first it was really a lot of trial and error.
Okay.
Interestingly enough, I was seeing a doctor, I was in New York at the time, who prescribed a neurocognitive retraining in person. This was a center in Manhattan that was working with people, doing neuroplasticity training for people with for stroke rehabilitation.
Got it.
And basically they were doing things that I now know as like nervous system calming exercises, right? But at the time, this was all very sort of novel. I think I also, my background in fitness actually really helped, because I had that concept of, you can condition your body to do certain things. And now I was just kind of learning, actually you can condition your brain to do certain things, to disengage, to relax, to re-engage in different ways. Yeah. So I had some guidance in that realm. And then I think one of the things that boded well for me and still bodes well for me, and probably for anyone that's watching a video like this already has this, it's curiosity, right? Curiosity propels you forward. Yeah. After that, I learned a lot of different things. I went deep into the Norman Doidge books. I started listening to those podcasts, that I mentioned. There were a couple of other brain retraining programs that were just coming online. I started going through those and just seeing if they have anything to offer. And everything has different nuggets, and now there's a lot of information out there. It's hard even to keep up with. Yeah. I still try and keep up with it and take in as much as possible. And sort of like Bruce Lee said, through our own experience, we take in what's useful, discard what's useless, and make what's uniquely our own. So I really think that there's a lot of learning, experimenting and experiencing, and then retaining what works and discarding ultimately what doesn't, knowing that everyone is sort of different, as well. And I think one of my favorite things to do is I like scanning through a lot of different information, trying a lot of different things, and trying to glean out what are the universal principles. If this person or this program is saying this thing, and this one is saying this thing, and this one is saying something else, where are they overlapping? And that's where we arrive at what I think are, what I share on our info calls and stuff, are what I call the universal principles of brain retraining, which basically come down to things like awareness, identification of patterns, interrupting patterns, and replacing those with new advantageous responses. And now we know if we have to add a fifth universal principle, it would be rewards, or the science of small wins, to activate dopamine and oxytocin and serotonin and things like that. So long-winded explanation, long-winded answer, but a very nuanced question there. And a lot of info. And as we mentioned before, it continues to evolve. New stuff comes out. We're always learning, we're filtering, and we are, now it's not just us, it's not just me, saying, this works well for me, it doesn't. We have a community of thousands of people who are responding to this information and really experiencing what's working for them.
Yeah, awesome. Okay, we have 2 more questions. You good? You good?
Good.
Okay, and this one is similar, but I like the way it's worded. How do you now get through unsettling times or whenever certainty arises in your life? Is it the same as it was before or something different?
Yeah. All right. Just thinking of how I'm going to approach this one.
Yeah.
I would say that the nature of the unsettling times has changed, right?
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things that I am eternally grateful for is might sound strange to people who are new to this work, is I'm incredibly grateful for having gone through those tough times, because it's given me such a set of tools that I can now use to approach new challenges in very different ways, different ways than I used to. So for that reason, I think my capacity, my ability to handle things and approach them, and know that ultimately, in a way, the worst thing that could happen has already happened. I lost my health in my 20s, lost all my relationships, lost my job, lost all my money, all this kind of stuff. So like I was really met with sort of the worst case scenario, and survived. So just knowing that alone is one thing. But beyond that, yeah, I think the tools are that now when I'm going through a challenge, with brain retraining and with neuroplasticity and stuff, it's not that we've like found a way to insulate ourselves from all of life's challenges. Life is going to throw unexpected things our way. What we have is the capacity to work with those challenges and not fight against them. Yep. And so now it seems like so far, no matter what challenge I've been met with, I'm able to at least maintain contact with this, I don't know, someone might refer to it as sort of like a higher sense of self, or a sense of the higher self rather, or at least like maybe I would just even refer to it as like a centered feeling in my nervous system that, sure, I sometimes get pulled off, but I know that center is there and I can kind of re-find it again. And then more often than not, I have to say, cheesy as it might sound, I really do practice what we preach, and I really do see and experience these challenges, a lot of them as opportunities to cultivate more of these resilience skills.
Awesome, that's great. All right, last question.
Hit me.
Tell us a little bit about your views on doing kind of like the supplement, the detox, the other treatments while you're participating in Reorigin and doing brain retraining.
Yeah, so treatments is a very broad category, as is supplements of things. And obviously, number one, you should always be consulting your doctor. This is not medical advice, so if you're working with a practitioner, continue to work with them as you go through brain retraining. But the question does come up a lot around treatments and supplements, and I absolutely see them being compatible with brain retraining. I think one important thing to keep in mind is that as we retrain the brain, really what we're trying to do is reestablish the body's ability to self-regulate and to self-heal as much as it can, right? And oftentimes what we find, what our members experience and what I experience, is that as they reestablish that self-regulation and homeostatic ability, they seem to require less external sources of regulation. That includes things like medicines and supplements. But again, before changing your dosage, speak with your doctor. But typically, I think my view on it is there's no good or bad. Everyone is an individual. I think that the miraculous thing and the amazing thing that we're really able to do is achieve this state of homeostasis. And that is really the goal of brain retraining. It's not to say that brain retraining, should be instead of or in lieu of or one or the other. They can both go hand in hand. And as we find that balance more and more, our body starts to self-heal. A lot of times we require less treatments.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it kind of goes back to one of the earlier questions you were mentioning, essentially just like we're all individuals, take what you need to take, leave what you don't need, and like know that there's there's not one magic pill. Like even brain retraining isn't like this perfect magic pill, because there's going to be challenges, especially when we talk about like life in general. So there's no magic pill. So really just like, you know, working with a specialist and things like that in order to really understand what every specific human being needs. Yeah. Okay. Those are all of our questions. You did an amazing job. You're only sweating a little bit, so you did great. Thank you so much for opening up, answering all of our members' questions. I know they really appreciate it. And all of you guys on YouTube, we really appreciate you guys being here, learning a little bit more about Ben's story. Make sure that you guys ask your own questions in the comments below. Also subscribe to our YouTube channel for all things brain retraining and nervous system healing. You can also sign up for our newsletter at reorigin.com/newsletter.